the moment, because the Crown Estate is the rights holder for CO2 storage on the UK continental shelf, we are supporting the government's CCS demonstration program by providing leases to project developers for their storage sites. Over the next 5 to 10 years, when these demonstration projects are developed and hopefully commissioned, the Crown Estate will be supporting them in the way that it currently is, which is to just provide the leasing arrangements. During this period of time, the Crown Estate hopes to develop the capability to then take over from the government the selection of projects and the running of competitions for leasing of storage sites. But that future is obviously dependent on the way that the demonstration program pans out, and indeed on the way that the electricity market reform drives any fossil fuel use in the future with CCS associated with it. So the Crown Estate needs to develop the capability for the future, just in case, and in that future we would take over the role of leasing competitive CO2 storage. At the moment this is a hypothetical question, because the future requirements of exploring, appraising and characterising storage sites as yet aren't known. As a business model, it's not impossible that the Crown Estate could contemplate assisting in the facilitation of exploration of storage sites, but at this point in time it's not on the radar. The transition from a petroleum licence to a storage permit and a Crown Estate lease is one that is currently being tested in the first demonstration project. But for future storage sites where petroleum licensees may not wish to transition, or may wish to continue with decommissioning rather than make a site available, these are new issues that haven't yet been worked through either by ourselves or DEC. I think post-demonstration there are a number of industry issues that I don't believe are yet really fully being addressed. I think the first and a very important one is the issue of supply chain and skills availability. The CCS sector would be in competition with the petroleum industry, also in competition with, at the capture end, other chemical industries, and a shortage of engineers at either end of the chain, and indeed also in transportation, is a very real risk. So I think that's an important issue that the industry needs to address over the ensuing period to be ready for post-demonstration deployment. The other thing is, as this conference has had as its primary theme, is the issue of financing. And there is a big transition to make from these early projects where risk needs to be shared with the state, with public funding, with government support, to one where it is a viable industry that is operating akin to, let's call it the natural gas industry or the LNG industry, where major projects are financed through known financing mechanisms. So I think that transition is going to be an extremely difficult one, actually, because it is going to take a lot of time before confidence is built in the sector and in the finance industry for these sorts of projects. I think it's essential. We heard at the conference actually that the projects that are at the most advanced stage around the world, particularly if we look at places like Canada and the US, and to a lesser extent projects that did get to an advanced stage in Australia but had to were not able to conclude for various reasons. These have all had public utilities involved with them, where to a large extent risk has been able to be shared by the public utility that is being funded and guarantees being provided by governments. So here in the UK, the important step of the demonstration program having very strong government support is actually it's essential. The EU directive is being transposed. A number of countries have met or almost met the June deadline. Those that haven't yet met it are still going through the process of transposing the directive. I think that for Europe, the critical issue has been the onshore storage and the public perception and discontent with the concept of onshore storage. What that does do is it means that the North Sea Basin and the states around the North Sea Basin that do have potential for storage in the North Sea Basin do have quite a good opportunity for the future. However, other issues come into play, like the transboundary transportation of CO2, and under the OSPAR Convention and the London Protocol, this is not yet allowed. And given that it could be decades before that is actually ratified to allow cross-border transportation of CO2, I think that the issue for Europe is going to be one of potentially quite a hiatus with CO2 storage and therefore CCS in general, if it can't be stored onshore. And on the other hand, for the UK, it means that the UK sector will be able to proceed because obviously it's will be storing domestic CO2. Yes, I think that's a very good approach. It shouldn't be exclusive of other approaches, but I think there does need to be somewhat more what I call system thinking or holistic thinking that does bring into play the needs of the emissions mitigation and climate change agenda combined with the decarbonisation of electricity and heavy industry as well. So I think the Rotterdam initiative is a very good one to demonstrate how public support can be gained for what is essentially an integrated and very sensible package. If that can be replicated in places like the Humber, that would be a great thing. Yeah. Well, that's actually very interesting because the three sectors that you talk about, as we also heard at the conference, are three sectors that have different business models. They have different business drivers, and they're trying to work together in an entirely new way. The issue of integration is a very important one, and the issue of risk sharing as a result of the need to integrate is, I think, one of the key drivers for not progressing as rapidly as we would like. That integration risk, as I mentioned before, can be taken on board by governments or by public utilities perhaps, but if we look at, as you say, breaking the sector down into various components, I think that probably works against the understanding of how to do it as an integrated business. The appetite for creating what you could call integrators or companies or businesses that would be taking the senior level, if you like, of risk is one that's not really been explored in many places around the world. So I think, yes, breaking it down into different components of the chain isn't necessarily working for us, but on the other hand, each of the different sectors of each of the different steps of the chain do need to understand the others. And I think it's only in the real projects, and certainly in the projects that we've been involved with these first demonstration projects, the issue of understanding each other and each other's needs and the risks that need to be shared amongst each of the participants is an extremely important one. And even within one part of the chain, like in storage, There are certain legal requirements that derive from the EU directive. If you don't actually try and go through those as a joint venture or some kind of joint effort in one part of the chain, like for storage, you don't actually come to understand the real issues. So I think breaking it down to some extent does work against us. Well, again, we have a legal framework that specifies who is responsible during various phases of a project, and I think there's no point in sort of going back over that. It is now cast in UK law, it is in the European directive. So the issue then becomes, should the state take on the role or the responsibility, the liability, once the CO2 has been assessed to be safely stored? And I think it is the only viable solution, and that's where we're at the moment. Well, personally I think that ultimately the climate change agenda and the need for emissions reduction will drive the CCS sector. It's, without exception, I think it's universally recognised that we simply can't proceed through to the middle of this century and beyond without mitigating emissions from fossil fuels. And the only way that is known to do that at the moment is CCS. Side by side with that, the issues, as they all have with various types of renewable energy, will still exist. So I think that there is ultimately the need to globally, not just in independent jurisdictions, globally drive the climate change agenda. If that is driven as it needs to be, and I believe it needs to be, then at some point in time the crossover point will come where CCS does actually present a business model that will stand on its own.
And then the banks might be interested.
Banks might be interested, yeah.